Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for coming on this pretty cold and miserable day. I'd just like to, just a couple issues before we start. This is something we have to do because of the election law. For the election, the FCCJ has sent an invitation to all the major parties so far. So for journalists whose target audience is in Japan, please be aware of the Public Office Election Act, or Koshoku Senkyo. We have no intention of favoring one party over another, and we are trying to invite as many party leaders as possible, but there is a limit to what we can do. We thank you for your understanding and cooperation. My name is James Sims. I'm a member of the PAC committee, and before that also, if you have any cell phones, please put them on manner mode. And I'd like to just briefly introduce the people at the head table. Today, our speaker is the head of the Ishin Party, and Mr. Kenji Eda, and then to his right is our interpreter, Ms. Takamatsu. And I know we don't have too much time today, so I just keep the introduction very brief. The party that Mr. Eda is co-heading with another official was just started, I believe, back in September, and it was made up of the merger of two different parties. Mr. Eda has been a very strong proponent of deregulation, government reform, streamlining, and has been very active in politics even before he became a politician. He started off his career as a career ministry official at the Ministry of International Trade and Industry, and was later the assistant to then Media Minister Ryutaro Hashimoto, and was also one of his main assistants or aides when Prime Minister Hashimoto was Prime Minister. At the time, he also pushed through, or tried to push through, quite a long list of reforms, including fiscal reform, as well as government reform, and that's something that he has carried on in his career as a politician in the Parliament. Anyway, without any further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker today, Mr. Kenji Eda.
どうも皆さんこんにちは。お招きいただきましてありがとうございます。
Hello everyone, thank you for your kind invitation today.
安倍総理解散を断行されまして、いろいろ言われておりますけども、もう選挙でありますので、維新の党、まだ出来たてほやほやの政党ですけれども、しっかり受けて出したいと思います。
As you know, Prime Minister Abe did dissolve the Diet, and there have been many criticisms, many comments made about this decision on his part. However, we are already in the election mode, and faced with the current situation, we, as the Japan Innovation Party, are prepared to do our best in the upcoming election.
維新の党は、英語名で言うと、Japan Innovation Party というのに名付けました。
And so I would like also to be very clear, the name of our party in Japanese is Ishin no To, but the English translation is the Japan Innovation Party.
イノベーションというのは、シュンペーターの時代には技術革新という意味でしたが、今ではありとあらゆる、政治、経済、社会システムの変革を意味するというふうに我々は理解しています。
The word innovation actually comes from the era of Schumpeter, excuse me, a very famous economist or economic professor. However, at that time he was referring to technological innovation. However, the word innovation has a much broader meaning. We think of innovation in the world of politics, in the world of economics, as well as social systems.
維新の党は、こうした政治、経済、社会システムの変革を通じてですね、この日本という国の形を変えていきたいというふうに思っています。
We at the Japan Innovation Party have a very, very clear idea of what we wish to accomplish. We would like to use the idea of innovation and to bring about change in the political system, the economic system, the social system in Japan, and to really basically recreate Japan, create a new form of the nation.
端的に言うと、民間と地域が主役の国づくりと いうことです。
If I were going to be very succinct, I would simply explain our view for the future of Japan as being a nation where the private sector and the regional, local sectors are the principal players in the nation.
これまで日本は官僚と中央が主役の国でしたね。
Of course, this vision is very, very different from the current state of Japan. Traditionally, Japan has been a nation where the principal players are basically the bureaucracy and also the central government.
それを抜本的に変革をして、本来日本が持つ民間の活力、そして地域地方の底力を十二分に発揮させていきたいというふうに思います。
Therefore, what we are aiming to do is completely fundamentally change this way of thinking. What we would like to be able to do is to take the inherent strengths of the private sector, the inherent strengths and abilities and skills of the regional sectors, and allow them to play the major role.
基本的に維新の党は民間の活力であるとか日本人のポテンシャルというか可能性を信じてるんですね。
What I'm saying is very, very simply that the Japan Innovation Party believes deeply and strongly in the fundamental strength of the private sector in Japan and fundamentally in the great potential of the Japanese people.
これまでの日本は基本的にこれ自民党政治と言ってもいいんですがやはり民間への不信感をバックにやはり例えば規制でがんじがらみに縛ると手かせ足かせをかけるということになっていたわけです。
I think this differentiates us very much from the traditional way of doing things in Japan. When I talk about the traditional history of Japan, I'm basically talking about the many decades which have been led by LDP-led administrations. And I believe that the LDP-led administration fundamentally did not believe strongly in the abilities or fundamental strengths of the private sector. There was a deep mistrust of the private sector, which is why so many regulations and restrictions are built into the system. In other words, these many restrictions and regulations now exist, and they are acting as shackles to hold down the private sector.
明治維新以来、中央集権体制といいますが、中央が地方を統制するという、時代が続いてきました。
As you know, Japan changed dramatically in the Meiji Restoration, 1868, when it became modernized. Since that time, the Japanese government has basically been a centralized one. The national government has basically taken control and directed the activities of all of the local regional governments.
こうした官僚統制、中央統制というのがもう今や限界に来ていると。
However, although this system has continued for many years, I believe that this system where everything is controlled by the bureaucracy, everything is governed by the central administration, I think this system has reached its limits.
したがって維新の党は官僚主導の国家から民間主導の国家へ、さらに言えば中央集権を打破して地域主権というんですかね、分権改革、地方分権改革を断行していこうと、こういうことですね。
In other words, what the Japan Innovation Party wishes to realize is to create a nation where activities and directions are not led by the bureaucracy, but rather by the private sector. We would like to get away from centralized government authority and basically promote a decentralization.
その官僚統制というか、民間のへの手かせ足かせの典型的なものが規制であって、これは安倍総理もおっしゃる規制改革ということ、これを断行していかなければいけないと思っています。
So when we talk about the control by the bureaucracy over the private sector, what is shackling them or holding them down or binding them down, these are, of course, represented by the many regulations that are issued by the government. Even Prime Minister Abe talks about deregulation, trying to correct this current situation, and that is what we also believe must be done.
これはもう安倍自民党には決してできない、しがらみだらけというか、既得権益まみれの、安倍自民党には絶対できません。
Although Prime Minister Abe does talk about regulatory reform, I do not believe, I'm convinced actually, that the LDP cannot bring about such regulatory reform. That is because there are too many deep ties and connections that exist with the LDP and other different organizations. In other words, there are many vested interests that have very close ties to the party.
今年の初めでしたが、ダボス会議で、安倍総理はあらゆる岩盤規制を打ち砕くんだとおっしゃいましたが、何もできてませんね。
You may remember at the beginning of the year, Prime Minister Abe visited Davos, and he said very dramatically that he would do everything in his power to basically break through what we call the bedrock regulations. In other words, the most fundamental, difficult to change regulations. However, he has accomplished nothing.
それはなぜでしょう。それはやはり農業においては農協、医療においては医師会、電力エネルギー分野においては電力会社という自民党の支持基盤があるからですね。
Why has he not been able to deal with these bedrock regulations? Why has he not been able to move forward with regulatory reform? It is because when you look at each sector, for example, if you look at the agricultural sector, the big, very large organization there is the Japan Agricultural Cooperatives Organization. If you look at the medical sector, the powerful organization is the Japan Medical Association. And with the power or electricity generation sector, you have the power utilities. All of these major organizations are strong fundamental supporters, backers of the LDP.
こうした日本の成長分野においてはですね、わざわざその規制をかけて、こうした自民党の支持基盤を守っているわけです。端的に言えば新規参入を阻害して、こうした支持基盤団体を守っているという図式が成り立っているわけですよね。
In other words, so what we are seeing is that all of these restrictions that have been issued by the government over the years are designed basically to protect these existing large, powerful organizations which back the LDP. Another way to put it is that these regulations exist to protect the status of these existing organizations and act as an obstacles, prevent new entrants from entering these fields.
象徴的な事例が例えば農業の分野で、減反制度を廃止するという、政策を打ち出しましたが、結果的には転作奨励金という補助金といいまして、要は米以外の作物を作る、それを奨励する補助金を出して、実際上は減反政策を維持しているということになりました。
An example of this is the LDP's announcement that they were going to do something about the policy that we've had in Japan for many, many years in the field of agriculture, which is the adjusting the production of rice. Although this adjustment in the rice production policy was changed in some way, what it really ended up doing was another policy was put into place that encouraged farmers to switch from producing rice to another product, and they would get a subsidy if they did this. In other words, it's an indirect way of basically maintaining this rice production adjustment system, not eliminating it.
この結果既存の農家というか、既存の農家の収入がですね、あれ確か3割アップぐらいして、この減反廃止と言われても、農協も農家も誰も反対しないというのが、この証拠ですね。
As a result of this new policy, the farmers who were already producing these kinds of crops saw their overall income increase by about 30%. Although this policy was presented as a way to eliminate this rice adjustment policy, the fact that no one in the field opposed it, in other words, none of the farmers opposed it, the Japanese Agricultural Cooperative did not oppose it, shows that it is simply another way of maintaining this current policy.
我々維新の党はもう名実ともに減反政策は廃止して、もうどんどんお米を作ってもらうと、日本の農家は。
The Japan Innovation Party has a very different approach. We are going to be very clear in implementing our vision, which is that we will truly eliminate this rice production adjustment policy. Rather than encourage rice producers to hold back on production and give them subsidies instead, we're going to encourage farmers to produce lots of good rice and then sell it.
減反を廃止すれば、今、1票、確か1万2000円、3000円、1票というのは60キログラムですが、1万2000、3000円の日本のお米は、すぐ8000円、7000円になります。
If we take away these rice production subsidies, in other words, if we take away the rice adjustment policy, we will see a fall in the price of rice. Right now, the rice is, counted in units of pure, which might be kind of like a bushel or it looks like a straw barrel container. It weighs about 60 kilos, and the average price of this 60-kilo unit is from about 12,000 to 13,000 yen. However, if the current policy is abolished, the price would probably immediately fall to about 8,000 yen.
それは明らかに生産調整というか需給調整をやめるわけですからね。減反という、需給調整、生産調整をやめるので価格は下落する。
In other words, the prices will reflect correct market forces. In other words, there will not be this government intervention where supply and demand adjustments are made.
そうすれば今でも4、5倍高い日本の米はもう上海でもシンガポールでも北京でも飛ぶように売れてますから、この値段が半分になるということはもっと売れて輸出産業化するということですね、日本の米は。
What I'm saying is that Japanese rice is highly valued in many foreign markets. For example, even though the price of Japanese rice is 4 to 5 times that of locally or other area-grown rice, it is sold well in Shanghai, Singapore, Beijing. If this price, however, falls to nearly half, you can see that rice exports will increase dramatically.
これと同時に株式会社がしっかり農地を借りるんではなくて買ってそれで農業ができるようにしていかなければいけない。これも新規参入ですね。
And again, we do have to encourage new entrants into these previously closed fields. One thing that we must do is to allow corporations, incorporated entities, to enter the field. Right now, there are restrictions. They cannot purchase agricultural land and do their business. The best that they can do is simply lease land, but they should be able to purchase land and run their business.
株式会社だけではなく NPO もいいですし、それから会社を引退したお年寄りや、あと都会が嫌になった若者がですね、農地を買って地方で農業をすることができるようになれば、農業というのはそうでなくても平均年齢が67歳、跡取り息子もいないという状況ですから、もう10年経てばそのままほっとくともうね、農業終わってしまいますので、そういう新規参入はぜひとも必要だと思っています。
And I do strongly believe that we need new entrants in this field. It doesn't just have to be incorporated entities, in other words, companies, but it could also be NPOs. It could be elderly persons who have already retired from their regular jobs and want to start farming. It might be young people who are tired of city life and wish to start a new career in the regional areas and farm. After all, if you look at the harsh realities of the agricultural sector, the average age of farmers now is 67. So you can see that if steps are not taken, if new entrants are not encouraged to enter the field, in 10 years, agriculture will collapse in Japan.
この減反の廃止とか株式会社の新規参入というのがまさにその規制改革なんですね。
So again, eliminating this rice production adjustment policy, encouraging new entrants such as corporations to enter agriculture, these are just simply very shining examples of regulatory reform.
こうして日本の農業は輸出産業、成長産業化すると石野党は信じています。
In other words, the Japan Innovation Party believes strongly that with these kinds of changes, the field of agriculture can become a growth field. It can become an export-oriented field.
もう一つ例を挙げれば電力の送電線を電力会社から切り離していろんな会社に利用させればいろんなローカルに小さな発電会社がどんどん地方に出てきます。
Another example where we can have more regulatory reform is in the power or electricity generation sector. If we separate the generation of electricity from the transmission of electricity and make the grid available to all, that means that many companies will be able to produce, generate electricity and use the grid. This will encourage many local companies to produce electricity.
今日本の地方は 疲弊しているわけですが、まあ、この太陽光にしろ風力にしろ田舎に行けば行くほどそのポテンシャルが高い。したがってそれを利用していろんな発電会社ができれば、雇用が生まれ給料を払うことができますからね。
We often talk about the fact that regional areas, local areas in Japan are deteriorating. They don't have much vitality. They don't have much business. However, we see that the potential for renewable sources of energy, where we're talking about photovoltaics, solar energy, or wind energy, the more local or more regional the area that you establish these facilities, the more potential they have to grow. In other words, this would allow local energy producing companies to be established in local areas. This would lead to local employment, local salaries being paid.
まあこうした、規制改革で成長分野に新しい血を入れる新規参入をさせるというのが、本当はそのアベノミクスの第3の矢と言われるものだったんですが、この矢が全く飛んでないということですね。
All of these things that I'm describing, this regulatory reform, basically allowing new entrants into different fields, allowing new blood into these fields to have more growth in them, these are all parts of the third arrow of Abenomics that Mr. Abe promised to realize.
医療福祉もそうですけれども、こうした第一の矢の金融緩和、私はカンフル剤ですけれども、その効き目があるうちにこういうお金だけではなくて、そのモノサービス、実体経済を動かす第三の矢が飛んでなかったというのが、今回の景気後退局面、景気悪化の最大の要因だと思います。
In other words, this third arrow was supposed to be the most important arrow. However, it was not truly released into the air, whether we're talking about the agricultural sector or the medical sector or the welfare sector. Many things were promised in terms of regulatory reform, structural reform, but nothing was fundamentally done. As a result of the three arrows, it was the first arrow, the monetary easing part, that gained a great deal of attention, but it was only not a panacea, but only a temporary solution to these problems. When we come to the actual real economy, in other words, the movement of goods and services, the third arrow was not truly implemented. And as a result, I believe this is the main reason we're seeing a slowdown in the economy, a recession in the economy.
で第2の矢、財政出動は我々はあらぬ方向に、違う方向に飛んでいると。それはもう公共事業のばらまき、昔の自民党が取ってきた旧来の手法、公共事業のばらまきに終わって、これは本当に第の矢はあらぬ方向に飛んでいるというふうに石野党は考えています。
Of course, between the first arrow and the third arrow, there was a second arrow, and it was launched. However, we believe that it was launched in the wrong direction. In other words, this was to deal with public spending. However, the public spending that was done is basically pork barreling, public works spending. In other words, much of that public spending brings memories of previous LDP policies, previous generations of LDP policies. So they did not go in the right, this arrow did not fly in the right direction at all.
ですからアベノミクス、特に第一の矢は安倍総理の専売特許ではなくて、私が2009年にみんなの党を決闘したときに、マニフェスト公約に挙げていたことを、安倍さんがやったと、いう意味ではアベノミクスじゃなくてエダノミクスじゃないかと。
I would also like to point out that although that first arrow, which was this quantitative and qualitative easing, has gained a great deal of attention, however, I would like to point out that he doesn't really own that idea. He doesn't have a patent on that idea. In fact, I can claim more of an ownership of this idea because when your party, Minanoto, was established in 2009, we had a manifesto, and as one of our campaign promises, in fact, this was an idea that I presented. This monetary easing approach was something that I presented in the manifesto. So instead of Abenomics, it should properly be called Abenomics.
で第2の矢も第3の矢も別に目新しい政策ではなくて、私が今紹介預かった橋本政権時代からずっと追い求めてきた政策ですね。
I would also like to mention that these kinds of arrows are not truly new things at all. These kinds of ideas about structural reform, etc., or regulatory reform, etc., are ideas that we have been trying to pursue, or I have been trying to pursue ever since Mr. Hashimoto's era.
ですから私も自民党政権を官邸で支えた経験からしていくらアベノミクスといっても自民党政権にはできないんです。
In other words, I do have experience in the government. I have supported previous administrations in the Prime Minister's office. But I know very much that although these are good ideas and they are very important ideas and need to be realized, they cannot truly be realized and implemented under an LDP-led administration.
全くしがらみのない意思の党しかできない。こういったことを国民の皆さんに訴えていきたいと思います。
In other words, it is only the Japan Innovation Party, a party that is truly free of all of these different connections and ties and shackles to different interest groups that can implement these kinds of reforms. It is only our party that is free to move in the right direction, and this is the message that I wish to convey to our voters.
加えて、直接のこの景気悪化の要因は4月の消費増税でした。
Of course, another very important factor that has led to the worsening of the economy is the increase in the consumption tax in April of this year.
私に言わせればアベノミクスというアクセルを踏んでいる時に同時に増税というブレーキを踏んでしまった。
In other words, if I were to give the analogy of an automobile, on the one hand, Abenomics, it was very much like pressing your foot on the accelerator, but at the same time pressing your foot on the brake as well, because the brake was the raise in the consumption tax.
暖房をかけている時に同時に冷房もかけてしまったということですね。支離滅裂です。
In other words, it's a little bit like putting on your heater and your air conditioner at the same time. So it was a shambles.
我々維新の党はもう9月の段階、決闘した段階でこれは景気は悪化局面に入ったと認識しまして、消費税増税凍結 10% 凍結法案をこの国会に提出をしたんですね。
The Japan Innovation Party was very, very aware of the situation, even as early as September when we were formed. In fact, very soon after we were formed, we recognized that the economy was headed in a very negative direction. As a result, we put forth a bill to the Diet to have the consumption tax increase to 10% be frozen for the time being.
安倍総理が10% 増税を先送りということで解散をされたわけですが、そんなことをする必要はありません。我々の凍結法案に賛成をすればいいだけの話ですね。
What I'm saying is that Prime Minister Abe dissolved the Diet with the justification that he wanted to be able to get the people's approval of postponing the increase to 10% of the consumption tax. However, he did not need to do that because, as I mentioned a few moments ago, our party had already put together a bill and submitted it to the Diet that would call for a freeze on the raising of the consumption tax to 10%. All the LDP, the ruling party, needed to do was simply approve this bill.
メディアの多くの方も論じているように、これはもう安倍政権の生き残りを考えただけのね、国民そっちのけ解散だというふうに私は言っています。
Of course, this is not something new, a new observation that I'm making, but rather something that many people in the media have already pointed out. This dissolving of the Diet by Mr. Abe, it was simply a ploy for him to, a strategy for him to somehow ensure that his administration would survive over the longer term. In other words, it was a dissolution of the Diet that did not take at all in consideration the interests of the people of Japan.
もう終わりということなんで、あと5分ぐらいで終わりますけれども。
I'm sorry, I've been told to wrap up, but I would like to speak for just about 5 more minutes.
もう一つの大きな柱が、地域主権というか、分権改革です。
Another very, very big pillar of our campaign is the promotion of decentralization. In other words, to have local areas have more command or control over their own destinies.
安倍政権はこの国会に地方創生法案なるものを出しましたが、相変わらず中央から 上から目線で、地方創生をしていこうという法案でしたね。
Of course, during Prime Minister Abe's administration, he did put together a bill, and it was passed, which is called a Regional Revitalization Bill. However, if you look at the contents, it is very much a bill where basically the leadership or the guidance or the control comes from the central government. It's very much a situation where the central government stands at a high level and looks down on the local areas on which it is controlling.
相変わらず中央に地方創生本部を置いて新しく補助金を作ってばらまくと、こういう発想では地方創生はできません。
In other words, the bill is basically one that is designed to have regional revitalization headquarters stationed in the central government in Tokyo, and it will be in control of giving subsidies to regional areas. That kind of central government-led regional revitalization can never be successful.
我々維新の党は中央から地方に徹底的に権限財源を下ろして地域のことは地域が決めるという分権地域主権改革を訴えています。
The Japan Innovation Party produces a much clearer policy of truly handing authority and control of their destiny to the regional areas. In other words, we want to have the central government transfer the authority for decisions making to the local governments. We also want to give them the sources of revenues directly so that local governments and organizations can make their own decisions.
この点でも安倍政権、自民党政権は極めて消極的ですね。
However, in regard to the approach that I just mentioned, the LDP and Prime Minister Abe has taken a very passive or unenthusiastic response.
公共事業予算が年間5兆円から倍の10兆円になっていますけれども、相変わらず中央集権で政治家がその公共事業の甘い汁を吸いたい、公共事業の権限は地方に下ろさないと、これがバックにある理由ですね。
In other words, we have seen the budget for public works project double from 5 trillion yen to 10 trillion yen. However, the way in which the money is dispersed is that the central government basically has all of the authority and decision-making powers, and the politicians come to try to get what are literally called the honey or the sweet syrup that comes from being able to have these big public works projects. In other words, the authority, the decision-making powers are not given to the regional areas.
こうして規制という民間への手かさしかせを取り払って、民間の活力をのびのびと発揮させる、そして地域主権改革で地域のことは地域に決める、これがまさに民間と地域が主役の国づくりという、維新の党の党是プリンシプルですね。
So again, what we feel at the Japan Innovation Party very strongly about is that we want to remove these shackles, these regulations, restrictions that are placed on the private sector. We want to be able to free the private sector to grow and as they wish. We also want to ensure that local regions, regional areas have the authority and revenues to determine their own destinies. This is exactly what I said at the beginning. The Japan Innovation Party has a vision for creating a new nation, a new form of the nation in which it is the private sector and the local regional areas that are the principal players. This is the fundamental principle of our Innovation Party.
もっといろいろお話したいことあるんですが、もう時間となりましたので、あとは質疑応答を受け付けたいと思います。
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to go to questions from the working press first. Please state your name and affiliation and keep it to one question and no speeches, please. Oh, go ahead.
Isabel Reynolds from Bloomberg. Actually, got more than one question, but I'll be very quick. What is your aim in the coming election? How many seats would satisfy you as a result? And how many would the current administration have to lose in order to lose the kind of stability that they've enjoyed for the past 2 years? And also, just very briefly, the Supreme Court has just announced a verdict on the upper house election, saying that it was unconstitutional or in an unconstitutional state. What do you think should be done about that?
それです。ブルームバーグでございます。今回、その獲得議席数、目標にしている議席数はいくつでございますでしょうか。そして今の現政権でございますが、どのくらいの議席を失ってしまいますと、今までのような過去2年間享受できたその安定政権というのを失うと思いますでしょうか。どのくらいその落ちてば安定政権にはならないということでございますでしょうか。そしてまた別の質問でございますが、最近最高裁の方でこの前のその参院選挙におきまして違憲状態という判決を出したのでございますが、これについてどう思いますでしょうか。
維新の党は今80人ですかね、小選挙区の候補者がもうこれはもう全員当選を目指して戦い抜くというしか言いようがありませんね。
In regard to your first question, the Japan Innovation Party is fielding approximately 80 candidates. And of course, it is our desire and our determination to ensure that all of the candidates win in these single-seat electoral districts.
また自公政権の議席については我々としては野党としては過半数割れを目指して頑張るとしか言いようがありませんね。
And in regard to your second question about the number of seats that we hope perhaps that the current ruling parties might lose, as an opposition party member, it is only natural that we would hope that the ruling parties would have less than half of the majority in half of the total seats. In other words, they would lose their majority.
最高裁の判決は我々は国会議員として重く受け止めなければいけないと思います。
In regard to the verdict that was issued by the Supreme Court, as a member of the Diet, I think all of us must respect very deeply such a verdict.
だからこそ一票の格差是正と選挙制度改革をですね、やっぱり全力を挙げてやってこなければいけなかったんですね。
It is because such a verdict was issued that the current administration really truly needed to do something to resolve this vote disparity problem. In other words, they needed to radically reform the current election system.
しかし安倍自民党政権2年の間、もう本当にこれも消極的でした。
But again, this is an area where Prime Minister Abe and his LDP-led administration basically were very passive, were not enthusiastic about implementing changes or reforms.
覚えておられると思いますが、2012年解散をする直前に、野田総理と安倍自民党総裁が党首討論で、特に安倍総理は増税をする、代わりに国会議員の定数を削減しますと約束しましたね。
I'm sure you all remember in 2012 when the Diet was also dissolved and an election was held. The circumstances that led up to the dissolution of the Diet was a deliberation in the Diet where the heads of the DPJ-led administration, Prime Minister Noda at that time, and the head of the LDP, the President, Mr. Abe, had a debate. And Mr. Abe at that point said that he would agree to an increase in the consumption tax, and in return he would ensure that the number of fixed seats in the Diet would be reduced. He made a promise.
その時の約束ではもう去年中にできてなきゃダメだったんですね。
You know that this was 2 years ago, so he's had 2 years in power, and so last year, sometime during the previous year, he should have been able to fulfill that promise.
当然その定数削減をするときにこの一票の格差是正というのも我々同時に考えて対処するわけです。それが全くその約束が果たされなかったということです。
In other words, if the fixed number of seats in the Diet had been reduced, all of the people involved in the political world would be able to have made adjustments in their policies and in their strategies to deal with that. But as you can see, Prime Minister Abe and his administration did nothing about changing the vote disparity problem.
我々維新の党は国会議員の定数は3割カット、ちなみに国会議員の給料も3割カットというのを今回公約にしています。
The Japan Innovation Party has taken a very clear and a definitive stance on this issue. We have declared in our campaign promises that our campaign pledges that we will decrease the number of fixed seats, fixed seats in the Diet by 30%. We have also promised to decrease the salaries of Diet members by 30%.
我々もう一人の代表である橋本徹さんはその大阪府知事になり かつその府議会に多数を占めた途端に府議会議員の定数を2割カットし、給料は3割カットしました。
I would also like to point out that we have had experience in doing these kinds of dramatic measures. As you know, the co-leader of my party, Mr. Hashimoto, when he became the governor of Osaka Prefecture and his party had the majority in the prefectural assembly, he realized a 20% reduction in the number of seats in the assembly. He also realized a 30% reduction in the salaries.
やればできるんですね。
In other words, if you're truly serious and you are brave enough to do so, you can achieve these goals.
しかし安倍総理がトップに座り、衆議院参議院で大多数のそのマジョリティパーティーになりながら、やれたのにやらなかった、やる気がなかったということです。
In other words, Prime Minister Abe was in a very similar position. In other words, he was the head of the administration. His coalition government had a great majority in both the House of Representatives and the House of Councillors. They could have pushed through these kinds of drastic reforms. However, they did not. And the reason they did not is that they really had no desire to do so.
今回、安倍自民党はまた身を切る改革、国会議員の定数削減を公約するそうですが、国民は誰も信じないでしょう。
I have heard rumors that Prime Minister Abe and the LDP are going to put into their campaign promises a pledge, again, to reduce the fixed number of seats in the Diet. However, I do not believe the Japanese people will believe such a promise this time.
Thank you. Any other questions from the working press? No. Go ahead.
Siegfried Kittel, freelancer from Germany. 2 points. First, immigration policy. Do you favor temporary immigration or lifelong immigration to Japan of skilled and perhaps also unskilled workers? I think the construction sector needs a lot of unskilled workers also. So, and the other point, how is the relation to the Minsto? Is of your party? Do you think there is could be a kind of a cooperation with Minsto as a opposition bloc in the parliament?
ドイツのフリーのものでございますが、2つの質問があります。1つはその移民政策についてでございます。どういうお考えをお持ちでございますでしょうか。臨時的あるいは長期において、あるいは永住権を与えるぐらいのその移民政策を賛成でございますでしょうか。そしてまた技能のあるスキルを持っている方たちだけを最初にお考えでしょうか。それとも多くのそういう技能を持ってない人たちも日本に移民したいという意思を持っているようでございますが、そういう方たちに対してどういう思いがありますでしょうか。で2つ目の質問でございますが、御党と民主党との関係はどういうものでございますでしょうか。何かその協力しまして議会で大きなその野党のブロック、反対のブロックになれるのではないかと思うのでございますが、ご関係についてお教えください。
移民については基本的にオープンです。
Fundamentally, in regard to immigration policy, I have a very open attitude toward this.
スキルド、アンスキルド、区別なくオープンですが、しかしこの導入についてはやっぱり段階的にやっていかなきゃいかんと思います。
In other words, whether we're talking about skilled workers or unskilled workers, I'm fundamentally open to the idea, and I don't necessarily think we have to differentiate between them. However, in regard to the implementation of such bringing in many immigrants, I think it must be done in phases, in steps.
やっぱり日本の風土とか、やっぱり日本人の理解を深めながらやっていかないと、フリクションが出るのが想定されるのでね、そこは円滑に徐々に段階的に受け入れていく、これが基本的にはこの少子高齢社会のね、日本にとっては必要なポリシーだと思いますね。
In other words, when we consider the culture, the society of Japan, we realize that we must, before we simply open the doors to immigration, ensure that the understanding of the Japanese people of other cultures and other peoples must be deepened. Otherwise, it can lead to frictions. You can see that this will happen. In other words, I do fundamentally believe in having a more open immigration policy, again, in steps, in a very smooth way, partly because it will help to deal with one of the biggest issues that we are facing, the graying of society, the fact that our population is decreasing, fewer children, etc.
民主党との関係についてはこの国会で相当共闘が進みました。共闘というのはコーポレーションですね。In terms of diet strategy.
In regard to our relationship with the DPJ, during this current diet session, we had many areas where we cooperated with the DPJ on different policies.
だからベーシックポリシーもどんどん近寄ってきたとは思います。
In other words, I believe that in regard to our fundamental beliefs, our basic policies, the two parties are becoming much closer in terms of thinking.
例えば消費増税凍結。
For example, freezing the increase in the consumption tax.
将来の原発ゼロ。
Having zero nuclear power plants in the future.
それから雇用労働政策ではこれ同一労働同一賃金っていうんですか、わかりますか？
And also in regard to employment and labor issues, we believe strongly in the fundamental principle that one should receive the same wages for the same work.
それから身を切る、国会議員や役人が身を切る、行政改革ですね。
And again, being resolved to, before asking taxpayers and the people to bear increased burdens, be prepared to make painful sacrifices ourselves. What I mean by that is, for example, decrease numbers of, diet members, cut down on salaries, personnel of government bureaucrats. In other words, lead to more administrative reform.
この局面でも例えば民主党維新中心に若手50人ぐらいが新しく新党を作るべしという動きも見せましたね。
In fact, in the political situation that we've been seeing for some time, about 50 young persons in the DPJ and the Japan Innovation Party have even considered putting together a new party.
民主党の閣僚経験者の一部の人たちが同じくその新党を目指して民主党内で行動したことも事実です。
In fact, even some persons higher up in the DPJ organization, persons who have actually experienced high posts in the government, in other words, cabinet posts, even they are positively have expressed some positive ideas about the formation of a new party.
私は2002年の初当選の頃から政界再編を訴えてきましたし、維新の党は前の前身のみんなの党時代からやはり政界再編、野党再編を旗印にしてきた政党です。
In other words, this is not a concept that is new to me personally at all. Ever since I won my first election in 2002, I have been calling for political realignment in the world of politics in Japan. Whether we're talking about the Japan Innovation Party, my current party, even when I was in my previous party, Minna no To, or your party, the banner around which we all gathered was basically political realignment.
この選挙の後もですね、そういう旗印のもとに、もちろん政治理念と基本政策の一致を大前提に、自民党に対抗しうる一大勢力を作っていかなければならないというふうに考えています。
In other words, I am thinking beyond the current election, and again, under this banner of having political realignment among the opposition parties, of course, the great prerequisite is that in regard to basic policies, of fundamental beliefs, fundamental concepts, we all have to be on the same page. But it is very possible that many of the opposition persons, people in the opposition parties, could come together to become a very large force to counter the ruling LDP-led coalition.
その場合は先ほど挙げた民主党閣僚経験者や若手政治家との連携がメインになると思いますね。
If this kind of coming together of all of these different opposition persons were to be realized, I think central to that movement would be some of the DPJ former cabinet members that I have mentioned earlier, and also many younger politicians within the DPJ that I also referred to earlier.
Would that mean just a cooperation within the party, between the two parties, or a merger of some of those people into your party?
いろんなバリエーションはあると思います。
Yes, I think there are many variations that would be possible.
Okay. I have one or two questions. One, you were talking about decentralization in terms of passing the power and also the taxing abilities to the local governments. I was also wondering about, I think, what might be called kansen chiji, where you have basically all these central government bureaucrats that are going to local governments as, deputy governors and then later running. I was just looking at Kyushu, and most of the governors are all former, I guess, Somusho and MEDI officials. I was wondering, how that affects the ability to actually do anything, at the local level.
我々は同州制を唱えていますが、基本的には市町村長なんですね、ガバナーじゃなくて、ガバナーは消え去るのみ、市町村長に権限お金を徹底的に動かすというのが基本なんですよ。
So it's a very interesting question. When we talk about passing the authority and also the sources of revenue to local governments, we're thinking not so much of the governors. In fact, we're thinking about eliminating most of the governors. But rather, we're thinking about the shichoson level, which are the villages and towns and smaller cities levels. In other words, to give these very local persons the authority and tax revenues.
市町村に権限お金を与えればね、より一層住民はちゃんとしたね市町村長を選ばないかんと思うようになりますよ。夕張の破綻のようにね、痛い目に遭うとちゃんと真面目にちゃんといい人を選ぼうということになりますから、これがやっぱり民主主義のコストのようなものだと思いますね。
In other words, I believe that such a system would be very good for local areas in that if the local mayors are given this authority and given sources access to money to implement different policies, then the residents, the voters of each district will take much more care in choosing these mayors. In other words, we have seen the example of the Yubari city in Hokkaido, a very small city that went bankrupt. And it is only when people, the residents of a city, experience great pain that they reevaluate their past performance, their past behavior, and choose a truly good person to be their next leader. That's part of the democratic process. It's part of the cost of the democratic process.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. I had one more on the electricity deregulation. There have been a lot of issues with the way the current restructuring has been done, including with the feed-in tariffs, and also there is a plan to split the transmission from the utilities. I was wondering what sort of issues you see going forward in terms of your idea to have more local or decentralized power production. Do you see issues in terms of the way it's currently set up, the new deregulation plan for the utilities?
はい、その電力セクターの規制緩和についてちょっとお伺いしたいと思うのでございます。いろんな議論が進んでいるございます。一つはその FIT、その規制買取方ですか、の制度でございますが、これについてもいろいろ問題点があるというふうに言われております。そしてまたその、送電、のその、発電と送電の分離ということでございますが、今いろいろその地方分権あるいはの話をされているのでございますが、今議論されているようなお話についてどうお感じでございますでしょうか。あるいは代案はございますのでしょうか。
大事なことは電力会社の送電線をね分離しても相変わらず電力会社の影響下にあるということではダメなんですね。まさにこれは自民党が狙っていることです。
The important thing to understand when we talk about the electricity sector is that there's a great deal of conversation about splitting the transmission and generation of electricity. However, as long as the large utilities companies, the power companies, fundamentally retain control over the grid, that does not really help the situation at all. And I think this is actually the situation that the LDP wants to realize. They want the utilities to maintain control and dominance over the grid.
だから買い取り制度でも今太陽光とか5万社の電気が拒否をされてるんですね、電力会社に。拒否というかもう送電しないという、要は送電を拒否されてるわけです、5万社が。
For example, you may know that although the feed-in tariff system was introduced, at present there are some 50,000 companies that are able to produce solar energy, in other words, photovoltaic energy, that have been refused access to the grid.
買い取り制度に問題もありますが、しかしこれはやってみないと、やらないと、これはあたかもNTTの通信回線を開放したら電話会社、携帯インターネットの会社がどんどん参入してきて、電気料金が電話料金が5分の1になる、インターネットの料金が10分の1になったことを見れば明らかですね。やっぱこういう競争効果、電気料金下げにも必要だと思いますし。
And I understand that there's a great deal of controversy about the feed-in tariff system. However, I fundamentally believe you should at least try it. It is worth trying. After all, we've seen what's happened with the breakup of NTT, allowing other companies, new entrants into the market, and allowing them access to communication lines. We saw that as a result, the emergence of big mobile companies, mobile cell phone companies. We saw the rise of internet. We saw that telephone calling prices fell to about 1/5 before deregulation, and internet access prices have fallen to 1/10. In other words, to have active competition in a market is a very good thing.
我々が目指す言葉を端的に言うと地産地消の小規模分散型電源って難しいんですけどね、日本で。地産地消、そのローカルエリアでも自給自足の極めて小さい分散型の電力会社っていうのがウゴのタケノコように出てきて、それが地域を活性化する。
In other words, what we're trying to realize is a nation where things are produced locally and consumed locally. And this is true not only in terms of other kinds of consumption, but also in terms of electricity as well. In other words, what we want to see is a nation where we have small-scaled companies or electricity generating organizations that are spread throughout the region. We want to see these little organizations spring up like bamboo shoots after a rain. In other words, we believe that this will revitalize local areas.
これが地域活性化を図ると同時に原発をゼロにしていくプロセスなんですね。
In other words, this process is a very comprehensive one. On the one hand, it will revitalize local areas, and on the other hand, it will lead to our realizing our ultimate goal, which is to free Japan from a dependence on nuclear energy.
原発について言えばもう安くありません。アメリカのエネルギー省の統計によるとホームページに載ってますけども、1キロワットアワーあたり原発は11セント、LNG 火力は1キロワットアワーあたり5、6セントですから、もう原発はもう2倍高い電源なんですね。
And I'd like to also add a comment about nuclear power. The long-held idea or belief was that nuclear power was a very cheap source of energy. However, if you look at the U.S. Department of Energy homepage, it actually shows you the price of electricity produced by different sources. The unit of measurement is 1 kilowatt hour. It's 11 cents per kilowatt hour for energy generated by nuclear power plants, but only 5 to 6 cents per kilowatt hour for thermal plants that use LNG. In other words, nuclear energy is twice as costly.
こういった電力自由化によるその市場メカニズムで原発は市場淘汰される、フェードアウトするというのが維新の党の原発政策です。
In other words, JIP, the Japan Innovation Party, wishes to produce a policy where we would push for more liberalization of the power field and allow market mechanisms to basically function as they should. In other words, in the final eventual scenario, nuclear power plants would eventually fade from the scene.
Are there any other questions from the working press? Are you working press or what? You are? Okay.
明治23年徳富蘇放送官国民新聞論説委員の藤田と申します。来年 NHK が吉田松陰とその妹という番組をやるそうで、維新というとですね、非常にこの明治維新のことを思うわけですが、やはり今ちょっとですね、今一つのエネルギーがですね足りないんじゃないかなということで、自民は確かに大きいですね。で、先ほどご説明の中に過半数割れを目指したいというようなことがありました。で、例えば全員ですね、維新が当選して80名、過半数割れってどういうふうに考えたら過半数割れに同じような考えの政治家ですよ、で過半数割れの、対抗できるような野党の勢力、コアリションでもいいです、それは作れるんですかね。その辺をちょっともし秘密でなければですね、ご開示。
From the Kokumin Shimbun, my name is Fujita. Your name, Ishin, which means Japan Innovation Party, but originally means is often translated as restoration. It brings to mind the Meiji Restoration, the pivotal point in Japanese history when Japan became modernized. In fact, the NHK serial drama of next year that will continue for the entire year is going to be based on Yoshida Shoin, who was a major character figure in the Meiji Restoration period. Anyway, what I'm thinking is that this period, the idea of Ishin or restoration or innovation is a very powerful one. But when I listen to you speak, I feel a slight lack of energy. What I mean by this is that I certainly understand that the great opposition that you are going to be up against is the LDP, and they are very large and big. And you have said earlier that what you were going to try to achieve in this election was to ensure that the ruling coalition would would be less than half of the Diet, the House of Representatives. Even if all of your candidates, 80 or so, were to win, that would still not be enough. So can you tell us a little bit more about how you envision not only your party, but other like-minded politicians of the opposition coming together to become a big counter-force in the Diet? Of course, it can be a coalition, it can be a merger. If it is not secret, can you tell us a little bit about your post-election plans?
私は先ほども申し上げましたが、2002年初当選の時から政界再編を訴えてきた珍しい政治家です。
As I mentioned earlier, since my first election that I won in 2002, I have been calling for political realignment in the political world, and I think I'm very unusual or unique among politicians for saying this.
今でこそ政界再編だ、野党再編だっていうのは釜びすしっていうかやってますけど、当時はもう政界再編というと、あんた何言ってんですかって言われましたね。
Nowadays, we talk about political alignment on an everyday basis. Everyone talks about possibly political realignment among the opposition parties. However, when I started in 2002 to espouse this idea, people came to me and said, "What in the world are you talking about?"
私はなぜ無所属、たった一人で始めたんですが、やはり自民党、民主党に任せていても、よく言うように基本政策すら違うごったになんですね、この政党は。だから自民党が政権を取っても民主党が政権を取っても結局この官僚機構霞が関に対抗できないんですよ、バラバラですから。
When I won my first election, actually I was unaffiliated with any party. I ran as an independent. And why did I do so? It is because I looked very carefully at the political world. I looked at the LDP and I looked at the DPJ. And either party, whichever party you look at, they're very similar in that they have many, many numbers of politicians. But the politicians have many, many diverse ideas. They cannot agree on basic policies. And because there is such a disarray or disunity in terms of fundamental beliefs and basic policies, it doesn't really matter whether it's the DPJ or the LDP that gains power in the administration. Because they don't have this strong unity, they cannot vie, they cannot compete, or they cannot counter the power of the Kasumigaseki bureaucrats.
だからこそ政治理念、基本政策ぐらいは一致させた真っ当なというかね、政党政治を作りたいと思って私はやってきたわけです。
In other words, this is exactly why I entered the world of politics. I wanted to change this situation. I wanted to create a situation, a political world in which people who at least agree on fundamental political beliefs, concepts, and who fundamentally agree on basic policies should come together.
2002年に一人で始めましたが、2009年みんなの党で5人。
So I started out all by myself in 2002. In 2009, I expanded this number to my party. We were 5 people.
2012年には確か18人か。ちょっと待ってよ。
And in 2012,
2013年に36人、去年は36人になり、
and last year, 2013, 36 people.
そして今年9月には52人の党首という立場にいます。
And now, in 2014, as of September of this year, the numbers of people who share similar fundamental ideas about politics and basic policies have come to be 52, and I am serving as one of the leaders of this 52-party bloc.
日本維新の会が石原さんたちと分裂したのも、そのみんなの党が我々優位の党が分裂したのも、これはすべて理念政策の一致を求めた分裂なので、私は非常にポジティブに捉えてほしいと思います。
And as you know, in the history of Japanese politics, our parties have undergone some divisions and splits and become established as new parties. But I would think that all of these movements have been in a very positive, for very positive reasons. In other words, before we became the Japan Innovation Party, there was the Japan Restoration Party, and it separated from the bloc of politicians who were led by Mr. Shintaro Ishihara. In other words, they split because there was dissension between the party members about fundamental ideas, fundamental political goals. I also have had similar experience. I was in the Minna-no-to, or your party, and eventually I broke off and created another party called Yui-no-to. But the reason for this split also was for pursuing the idea, the vision of creating a party where only like-minded people assemble.
その結果橋本さんと私のパーティーが合併をして維新の党ができ、これはもう完全に政治理念基本政策が一致しています。
And the second and final step in all of this has been that Mr. Hashimoto's party and my party came together, and we confirmed that we have the same fundamental political beliefs and concepts and same fundamental basic policies, and therefore we decided to come together as a new party. So,
だからこそ選挙の後もその民主党の中には考え方が一緒の人がいる、その他の野党の方にもいるかもしれない。そういうところとしっかり連携をして自民党に対抗し得る勢力を作っていきたいと思うんですね。
So again, this fundamental stance that I've been taking throughout my political career has remained unchanged, and I think it will stay the same even after the election. In other words, if we are able to find like-minded people within the DPJ or among other opposition parties, it is very, very possible for us, and I hope that we will be able to create some kind of a solid partnership or tie-up or some kind of a cooperative relationship so that we can all come together as a powerful countervailing force against the LDP coalition.
でこれで終わりますが、一番の今の日本の国会の問題点は、よく一強多弱と言われるように、もう巨大与党の前にもう弱小野党がバラバラという状況で、全く緊張感がないことですね。
And I would like to end with one statement. I'm sure you're all aware that the biggest problem facing the current Japanese diet is that you have one huge power, and then you have many, many small opposition parties that are all very, very weak. In other words, because the opposition parties are so fragmented and weak, there's no real tension as there should be in the parliament.
緊張感のない政治はやっぱり慢心の政治を生みます。
In other words, if there is no friction or tension between opposing forces in the diet, you have a situation where there is great complacency or self-satisfaction on the part of the stronger party.
民間会社でも競争があって初めていい製品を生み出すことができるんですね。
It's true in any field. If we look, for example, at the private sector, if one company dominates a sector, there is very little stimulus for them to work harder. But if there's competition in the market, then you see the birth of and emergence of new and better products.
だからこそ、一応その自公過半数割れという目標は言いましたが、一番肝心なことは選挙の後、しっかり緊張感のある切磋琢磨できる自民党とそういう国会状況を作り出さないと、これは本当に国民を向いた政治になりません。
I said earlier that our goal was to try to ensure that the ruling coalition would not have a majority after the election. However, what is even more important than that is that we must create a situation within the Diet where we are able to have different opposing voices that are able to debate and discuss ideas with each other in a truly tense way. Because without that kind of tension in the Diet, you cannot create a politics that really face the people and look after their needs and are considering their wants.
慢心の政治の象徴がこの5月から国会議員の給料2割カットが100% 満額支給になり、国家公務員の 7.8% 給料カットがまた元に戻ったと。増税を国民にお願いしている時期に、これまで大震災の財源で、国会議員役人の給料を下げていたのを上げてしまったという、これ非常識な政治がまかり通っているというのがその慢心の政治の私は象徴だと思ってるんですね。
I mentioned earlier that when there is no tension in the Diet and one party has great dominance, then they are basically feel free and complacent enough to do whatever they wish. A very good example of what I'm saying is what we saw happening in May of this year. As you may remember, after the Great Japan East Japan earthquake, in order to hold down the finances of the nation, Diet members' salaries were cut by 20%, and national civic employees, public employees, their salaries were cut by 7.8%. However, in May, both of those cuts were eliminated and they were brought back to 100% of their former levels. And this was a time when the government was asking the people of Japan to bear increased taxes.
Well, thank you very much. We've run out of time. Mr. Eda actually extended his stay here by quite a bit. And so I would like to thank him, and is our usual club tradition, we would like to give him an honorary membership for a year. And hopefully we'll see him maybe here at the press club sometime after the election. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. どうもありがとうございます。